Welcome to the Unit 4 overview video. Congrats to you. We have now officially crossed the halfway point of WSSD 605 Sport and Law. I know that winter courses are a lot of work in a short amount of time, so I want to just quickly give you a kudos and also tell you that we can do this as we sort of round this final stretch of the course. So, Unit 4 dives into chapters 4, 5, and 11. To provide a brief overview of what these chapters really encompass, they talk about agency law, contract law, and labor law, things that relate very heavily to professional settings, right? Whether that's with actual athlete agents or within sport organizations getting different contracts signed. But now they're really starting to take shape within an amateur level of sport, and that's college sport. And so after reading through Unit 3, my hope is as you are reading through Unit 4, especially when we get to the discussion post in relation to some current events within this particular topic area, labor law within college sport, that we can have an interesting discussion because I think that this is something that, if I could predict the future, is going to change rapidly in the next 5 to 10 years that really could redefine what college sport looks like. So, before we get there, though, let's get our engagement points for Unit 4 done and out of the way. So this is our do now activity while listening to this video as we kick off Unit 4. In 5 sentences, please explain which legal concept has been most relevant to you, to your current or expected slash desired future professional role. Something that we've already talked about between Units 1, 2, and 3. So again, please email me those 5 sentences to my email listed on the screen, and I am looking forward to hearing what you have to write. As a note, this is a great opportunity for you to start thinking about your career connection reflection video, which is due during Unit 5. So that's the intention behind this particular engagement activity. Looking at our structure for this week, you have your engagement and discussion initial post due on Friday, as well as your chapter quizzes for chapters 4, 5, and 11, your 2 reply posts, and your applied activity number 4 due on Sunday night at 11:59. Let's talk about chapter 4 to begin with. Chapter 4 covers agency law. Agency law has existed for hundreds of years. The basis of this law is for one person to allow another person to act on their behalf. So, an agency relationship is really one in which one party, an agent, agrees to act on behalf of another, a principal. So, for my Eagles fans in the room, you can see here up on the screen in relation to Jalen Hurts and his agent, Nicole Lynn. And Nicole Lynn helped to negotiate, which was at the time one of the highest paid players in the NFL, excuse me. And so this is a great example of what agents do for their athletes. And you'll see here in learning objectives 3 and 4, specifically the ways that athlete agents are regulated according to various laws as well as policies implemented by leagues. And then additionally, like what are the duties that agents have to uphold? What are the duties that principals have to uphold within an agency relationship? So we can define agency as a consensual relationship in which the agent agrees to act on behalf of another person who is called the principal, and that person agrees to be represented by the agent. So, in reference to this example here, the most common way that we see this is with athlete agents. So, as I said before, Jalen Hurts is the principal within this particular agency relationship, and his agent is Nicole Lynn. And Nicole Lynn negotiated Jalen's contract with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, there are a lot of other examples of principals and agents within sports, and you'll read about this within your textbook because agency law doesn't just exist with sport agents. This can exist with an employee who sells merchandise or concessions at a game. This can be if a manager promotes Spooky Nook as a location for AAU Under Armour championships. This can be personal trainers from Planet Fitness who are recruiting clients to attend that gym. This could also be in relation to ticket sales. So let's say for the NWSL team, the Orlando Pride, right? That would be the principal in this relationship. And an agent, someone who is employed in the ticket sales department, who is selling tickets for home games for the Orlando Pride, would be an agent acting on behalf of the principal within the context of this relationship. So you'll read a lot more about different examples within the textbook to see that it's just very broadly defined and it isn't just as simple as saying this person is a sport agent. Now, how are agencies formed? There are three ways. The most common way that we see this within sports settings is by contract. The second way that this is possible is through ratification. Ratification occurs when a disclosed principal adopts or confirms a contract entered into on their behalf by an agent who didn't have the authority to act. So, really, it allows principals to enter into contracts for their benefit. An agency that's formed by a parent authority is also called by estoppel. This means after the fact, someone is retroactively approving of the decision or action. This will all make sense when you begin to read into this more within your textbook. But just so you are aware, this is how agencies are primarily formed. The other piece that I alluded to within discussing your learning objectives was in relation to duties that are involved within the agency relationship. So this is bidirectional. The agent owes a principal a fiduciary duty to act primarily for the benefit of the players that they represent, not for their own benefit, especially while part of the agency relationship. These are really broken down into two specific duties: duty of loyalty and duty of obedience. So you'll read a lot about these, as well as when these duties are challenged due to conflicts of interest. Now, the principal also owes an agent four specific duties. Two that I can imagine would be most applicable right now at the before you get into reading the chapter would be fair compensation for their work, as well as duty of good conduct. So let's bring this back to our example here with Jalen and Nicole. So here, as Jalen Hurts' agent, Nicole Lynn is responsible for acting primarily on his behalf, upholding those duties of loyalty and obedience. Jalen also has duties owed to his agent, Nicole. This means that he must compensate her for the work that she's done within the context of that agency relationship. The final thing that I would like to mention at the onset of chapter 4 is just why and how are athlete agents regulated. Unfortunately, in the past, there have been a number of unscrupulous sport agents that have taken advantage of athletes, both at the amateur and professional levels, by frauding them, taking money, or getting them to sign in contracts that unfortunately weren't the best fit or benefit for them. Therefore, having some way to regulate athlete agents is really important to protect the interest of athletes in and of itself. So, the NCAA, as you'll read in the textbook, has written compliance policies in reference to athlete agents. Note that this textbook was written right when NIL was coming out. So now that this NIL is in existence, this word agent might be used in reference to like overseeing an NIL deal, but really this might be called an advisor. And this is also something important to know if you're interested in working in the college space, that this could really change within the next couple of years how we classify athlete agents for that represent or that could represent college athletes. The other two ways that athlete agents are regulated is through legislation. So at the state level, this is regulated through something called the Uniform Athlete Agent Act, the UAAA. This is a uniform law that states can choose to adopt that gives transparency and protects athletes and agents. Really, the primary purpose of this is to be able to streamline the process of certification and licensing. Previously, before the UAAA was implemented in the early 2000s, every state had a different certification and licensing process for agents. As you can imagine at the professional level, because pro athletes are playing in a number of states, this makes it really confusing for agents and also allowed them to potentially take advantage of athletes. So having a uniform law that exists across states helps streamline that process, promote transparency, and protect both individuals, the athlete and the agent. At the federal level, The Sports Agent Responsibility and Trust Act, SPARTA, love that name, prohibits agents from making false or misleading promises or providing gifts and cash to student athletes or to those associated with student athletes. You'll read a little bit more about SPARTA within the textbook, and the authors even provide a little bit of criticism surrounding this particular federal law. Let's pivot to chapter 5, which is closely related to chapter 4. This chapter covers everything related to contract law. So in this particular chapter, you'll learn about the elements of a valid contract, common provisions within a contract, the types of contracts that are present within a sport, as well as the issues that arise when a contract is breached. So contracts govern pretty much everything that happens within an organizational setting. That's one thing that I hope that you take away from this chapter, that it's really important to read, to understand, and also to appreciate and get signatures on contracts. One popular clause that you probably heard a lot about in recent news, especially with the current landscape of college sport, is the buyout clause. Some people feel that this is very smart negotiating. Others feel that these clauses raise questions for colleges where the math doesn't really seem to math. Coaches can make more money not coaching when they're let go, as opposed to when they actually coach. So, if you're familiar with this term, you'll also probably be familiar with a coach that really, I believe, holds the record as of right now when I'm recording this video. The record payout for a college coach goes to Jimbo Fisher, who received $76.8 million when he was fired as the head coach at Texas A&M University in 2023. Now let's get into some key concepts here. We can define contracts as a promise or a set of promises for breach of which the law gives a remedy, or the performance of which the law recognizes in some way a duty. Basically, it's saying this is an agreement between different parties, and that if it's breached, the law is able to alleviate the damages ensued by the individual affected by that breach of contract. And that being able to fulfill this contract is, in fact, a legal duty. It is a commitment. You'll read about the required elements of a contract that are listed on the left-hand side of the screen. These consist of offer, acceptance, and consideration. Your textbook talks about elements 1 and 2, offer and acceptance, within a concept called mutual assent. This is defined as a conditional promise to do or not do something, and then the eventual acceptance by the offeree according to the terms that have been offered. The third element of a the third required element of a contract is consideration. This is the fundamental element of a contract. This is what we can define as the exchange of value or benefit that each party within the contract agrees to give up because of the agreement in and of itself. You must have consideration in order to have a valid contract. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see something called enforcement elements. So a contract can have all of the required elements, but not be enforceable without legality and capacity. So the first legality, the consideration involved, so that's the exchange of value or benefit that each party agrees to give up because of the agreement. That consideration must be legal. A promise to do something illegal is not a valid consideration in the eyes of the court. The second element is capacity. Individuals must know, understand, and appreciate the terms by which they are agreeing to. Contracts are not valid. They're not enforceable, without capacity. In fact, they're voidable. One very common example that we see this with is individuals who are minors. So people under the age of 18 do not have the legal capacity to consent to a contract. So as a recap, the three required elements of a contract are offer, acceptance, and consideration. Um, but in order for a contract to be enforceable, you need to have legality and capacity. Over the course of the chapter, you're going to read and specifically look at some language within a variety of different types of contracts: coaching and employment contracts, games and events, waivers and releases, lease of a facility, etc. So, like for one example, when we look at games and events, the particular images here listed up on the screen is for the Head of Charles Regatta. And this is a rowing race held on the Charles River up in Boston, Massachusetts, in October of every year. So, this is a famous event that takes place in a public place. As you can imagine, there must be a variety of contracts involved in order to have this event run smoothly and safely, not just with the teams that are involved, but perhaps with travel arrangements for each particular athlete or competing team, perhaps with leasing or renting facility spaces, the boathouses, in order to use to store the equipment, renting or leasing any particular area where competitors or spectators are located. What type of waivers do the athletes need to sign in order to participate within this activity? The list can go on and on about the number of contracts involved within this event, as I'm sure you can apply it within any other event or activity within a sports setting. Now, here's the thing about contracts. We know that there's a lot of issues that can arise with them in the first place. Specifically, like what happens if a breach of contract occurs? Or what element of a contract should we be leaning on if damages come into play because that particular contract was breached? So, here listed under the screen, under that definition for contracts that I provided earlier, are a few different things that I think are important for you to pay attention to when reading the chapter. The first is something called a parole evidence rule. This is a rule by which parties must express their full intentions in writing. No other evidence can be introduced that contradicts the term of the agreement. This particular rule is very important because it prevents people from asserting facts that are inconsistent with or that contradict an existing contract, saying, this is what we've agreed to, this is what's been written, and therefore this is what we must be held accountable to. The second concept is called statute of frauds. This is a legal principle that states that there are three types of contracts that must be written about, that must be in written form. It can't be an oral or a handshake contract, anything like that. Finally, you'll read more about remedies and best practices surrounding how do we write and implement contracts, as well as what are important things that we need to pay attention to should the worst case scenario happen and a contract be breached. The final chapter within this unit is chapter 11, and this covers labor law, which is a very timely chapter in today's world, considering just how much college sport has shifted in the last 4 to 5 years, as well as at a professional level. There are a number of collective bargaining agreements that are expiring within either this present year or within the next few years that could really dictate how professional athletes are treated as employees. So within this chapter, you will read the background about how labor law developed in the US and also how the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, was implemented. And the NLRA is a landmark piece of legislation that details the rights that employees and employers have within the US. It consists of a number of different sections. You will read within this chapter the tools that both employees and employers have to be able to gain concessions during the negotiation process of collective bargaining, as well as the ways in which the NLRA really protects the power dynamics at play within um, employment relationships between employers and employees. So, some key concepts for us here. I mentioned this earlier, the National Labor Relations Act. This is probably one of the most important things that you can know walking out of reading this chapter. Please be sure that you pay attention who it applies to. There are multiple sections within this law, but Section 7 and Section 8 are most relevant to our course. Section 7 provides employees with a set of four rights that you should know. Section 8 prohibits employers from pressuring or coercing employees into not using those rights. So, really, the purpose of Section 8 is to uphold Section 7. And then finally, you'll read about the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. This particular organization is responsible for overseeing labor law in the US, including any unfair labor practice charges. A second prominent theme within this chapter is a union. So, a union is defined as a group of employees who use collective strength to protect member rights. Every professional sport league in the US has a union. It's called a players' association. Unions are important because they engage in the collective bargaining process. So the NLRA requires that the collective bargaining process, which is defined as a negotiation process by which employers and employee union representatives meet in mutually agreed upon places and times and in good faith to develop collective bargaining agreements, also known as CBAs. The NLRA requires that employers and employees discuss these three mandatory terms: wages, hours, and conditions of employment. Now, the NLRA does not require that these two parties reach an agreement. It only requires that they meet. And why is unionization important in professional sport? Oftentimes, when we think about pro sports settings, our mind goes to the biggest superstars in the game. So, depending on what sport is your favorite, what sport you follow, what team you follow, chances are you can probably tell me the best player on that team and maybe how much money they're making. But can you tell me the practice player on that squad? Can you tell me how much money they're making? Right? A union is really important from a holistic perspective because it provides collective strength. Now, if we were to say who's the best basketball player right now in the NBA, I can make an argument that it's been LeBron James over the last 20 years of his career, right? LeBron James doesn't need to worry about his rights. He's getting paid really well. He's obviously getting paid not just by his current team, but also endorsement contracts, etc. It's the last player on the bench of the Lakers that is fighting for their spot on the team that needs the protection of a union, that needs the ability to know that they can be guaranteed health insurance, a minimum player contract, etc. And that's what these players' associations, these unions do. They enable employees who have a lot of power and some that don't have as much power to band together and use their collective strength to protect member rights. Now, unions don't just apply to professional sports, they apply to a number of different industries, and chances are you might be in a union or know of a union based on your current role, or maybe a family member or a loved one who engages in a union. At Millersville and across the PSAC, faculty members, coaches, and athletic trainers are unionized. So this topic is heavily relevant not just for athletes, but also for sport managers. Now, the final point that is on this screen that we haven't talked about was just economic tools. So these are tools by which employers and employees will use if that collective bargaining negotiation process is stalling or not progressing. The most common examples that we have probably seen traditionally is a strike, which is when employees refuse to work, as well as a lockout. And this is when employees are locked out of work. So you'll see which party, employer, employee, really leverages this particular tool, as well as why they might do so after reading the chapter. So labor law continues to shape the rights and interests of, sport employees, but also athletes really heavily right now. And so I strongly encourage you to pay attention to changes within labor law, especially within the college athletics landscape, excuse me, because I think it's going to shift pretty dramatically, as I've alluded to before. Your discussion post will integrate these topics, looking at current updates such as the House settlement in June 2025, and allow you to discuss what might be the benefits or the downsides to deeming college athletes as employees, specifically because this is a topic area that's coming up pretty heavily right now. Okay, so the last part for this video is just a brief introduction to the applied activity number 4. This activity requires you to complete 3 different tasks, and these tasks are all dependent on you reviewing a provided contract. So on D2L, I provided you with a number of different contracts: a game contract, a coach employment contract, an athletic director contract, a sponsorship or marketing contract, etc. These are all publicly available resources that I found so you can see the language that's present within real life agreements that dictate the way that the way that athletic programs operate. So I encourage you to read through a contract, find one that's most relevant for you, either one that's most interesting or perhaps that's most directly applicable to your current or future professional role. Review them, and then complete the tasks according to the instructions provided within the assignment sheet. As with other assignments, I would probably set aside about an hour and a half to complete this activity. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about these contracts and the different elements that you've reflected on. Have a great week and good luck.